Well, thank you. This keynote has actually been a clandestine operation to bring in somebody that I'm going to share the stage with here shortly. I know several folks probably have know who I am, but I thought I'd give a quick introduction. I do serve as a department chair at the Department of Ag and Tourism at Arkansas Tech University, which includes our recreation degree suite. I attended Oklahoma State for my PhD. Oklahoma State. And I was a twice grad there. Got my undergrad there as well. Got my master's at Western Illinois. Worked in Muskogee, Oklahoma, Broken Arrow. Did some urban forestry planning in the Tulsa and Chickasha area. So I have a strong connection to Oklahoma. Graduated Pryor High School in Northeast Oklahoma in the 90s, which makes me feel really old. We were talking about that earlier. One thing that I really appreciate along my career path has been, I feel really blessed and lucky that I've had some tremendous mentors along the way. And when I think about mentorship and the pathways that we take to find our career and find our path and start creating our legacy, I've been very lucky to call several people, a couple in this audience, mentors and friends. And so when I thought about, when Gerald and I were speaking about a keynote opportunity, I thought it'd be a great opportunity to share some time with somebody who I consider a dear friend, a mentor, and somebody who's changed my life tremendously. So I want to do a quick introduction real quick. Dr. Lowell Caneday, and I'm going to read some of these numbers because they're tremendous. Dr. Lowell Caneday, Professor Emeritus at Oklahoma State University, began there in 1981 and retired in 2017. That's a long time to spend in one institution, and it was an incredible time. And I don't even know if these numbers are completely accurate, because when I was looking at a CV, I thought these were pretty impressive. But the CV, I've got it printed off if somebody wants to read it. 41 national, international publications, 28 other journal publications, 135 technical reports, 5 books, 37 monographs. 142 research presentations and 69 other presentations as well. Like, these are numbers I cannot fathom, right? 124 funded projects, mostly in the Oklahoma area. 34. He has advised over 30 master's candidates and over 45 doctoral candidates as well. And we were mentioning yesterday at dinner, at our drinks and snacks, I would say, when we think about like a coaching tree and all the coaches that come after, whether it's a Bill Belichick or that one guy from Alabama whose name I won't say, you think of all the people that have produced and the legacy you leave, and we really, Dr. Gibson, Dr. Kavanaugh, and several of you, right, have come under the tutelage of this individual. So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Lowell Caneday to the stage. So the format here is I've got some questions we're going to go through, and we're going to talk about some, a life of service in the field, and then we'll hope to have some time at the end with Q&A. So as we go through, think about what you might want to ask or include, and we'll have time for that. Is it working?
I believe it's working. All right. Thank you, Mike, for those kind words. It's good to see y'all.
First, thank you again for joining me. We'll get right to it. So I think for the sake of folks out there, can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up in your childhood?
Having talked with Mike a little bit about this discussion, I may need to apologize for some of the details, but I grew up in a small town in the eastern part of Minnesota. So we were right on the border between Minnesota and Wisconsin. Our farm adjoined the St. Croix River. For those who are now aware of federal designations, the St. Croix River was designated as a wild and scenic river. Our town had an impoundment, so the area north of the impoundment was a wild river. The area south was designated scenic. And we're about 50 miles from Minneapolis at that time. And grew up in a farm life, a small farm. For those of you who are younger, we were a non-cash economy. Back in those days, you did not commonly use money. It was a barter economy. And I couldn't tell you how many times I took cucumbers to the grocery store or honey to a farmer next door in order to get them to sire our cows. It was the way the economy was at that time.
So to kind of follow up on that, how did your experiences on the farm and the St. Croix in that general area there in Minnesota, how did that kind of start your connection to the outdoors, to the park systems?
Our family grew up avid campers and hikers, but really the change for me started in 1964. I was a sophomore in high school, and I was hired by Minnesota State Parks and a state department in Minnesota to spray a defoliant on ribes. Ribes is a white pine blister rust host, and it was killing our trees in the park. So we ended up spraying a mix of 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T. Now, I don't know if any of you served in Vietnam, but that mix in higher concentrations was called Agent Orange. So I'm a kid carrying a sprayer on my back, spraying essentially Agent Orange in the park. And it'd be interesting, every so often people would be picking gooseberry bushes that I had just sprayed, and we weren't allowed to talk to them. But that's what started me in the field. So in 1965, I was hired by Minnesota State Parks, became a clerk, managing payroll, purchasing, personnel for the state park, and eventually took my ranger exam, but I was too young to be a ranger. You had to be 21, and I was not yet 21. But those were kind of the introduction to the field.
So to kind of, I guess, expand on this a little bit, is so you're talking about your farm life, your introduction to the state parks, and doing some of that Agent Orange defoliant. What other things did your family, like cultural traditions or family traditions, or what other things did you do as a family that kind of connected you to nature or solidified that outdoor recreation connection?
The town that I grew up in, right there on the St. Croix River, is about 50 miles from Minneapolis and St. Paul. And we were the getaway location for people who lived in the metro area. And our park became the weekend and holiday gathering point. And there was a strong cultural linkage between nature and the lifestyles that people were leading at that time. Due to the impoundment of our river, the area north was designated in 64 the Wild River, and south was the recreational river. And that began to define the types of activities that occurred.
And so as you think about, I guess when you look at retrospect, right, you think about your career and so many years ago, are there any I would say defining moments or specific things that you would say was, I call it the hook, because, I like to go fishing, but I call it the hook, or the things that sparked that interest or that kind of kickstarted your career more so than just spraying defoliant?
Really, it was the people that we would work with, the opportunities to work in the park, getting to connect people with the natural resources, leading them on nature hikes, or a variety of other things that gave you the opportunity to develop a connection between people and the environment, and the love that I had for that.
So I think the next thing to share, what I would like to share, or have you kind of walk us through, is not just with the outdoor recreation, so to speak, but also thinking about traditional parks and recreation, municipal recreation. Can you kind of walk us through like some of the early years and what kind of activities you're involved with, and maybe kind of get us from, I don't know, like early baseball? I know you're a baseball player, right? So like think about your early baseball years and kind of just give us a walkthrough of how that progressed into your first positions in recreation.
Clearly, growing up in a rural setting like that, my early childhood did involve sports. I played baseball. Actually had an opportunity. I was recruited by a representative of the Chicago White Sox, but I chose to turn down that offer and go to college. But I was also a basketball player in high school. But it was the love of nature and all of the things that we did that really were the prime drivers of my life. The opportunity to go to college took precedence over the sports that I had at that time. In my junior year, I was hired by Minnesota State Parks, and I continued to work for them, serving as a clerk. I actually worked for 6 years with the Minnesota State Park system. But recreation was a major driver for so many aspects of my life. In my college years, I operated the intramural recreational sports program for this school down in Texas that I went to, Laterno College at that time. And we did some unusual things. We had the school is a mechanical engineering type of school. So as part of our intramural program, I proposed a go-kart race where students would build their own go-karts. We would shut the campus down and have a race on campus. And it became a tradition. They're still doing it. As a part of my undergraduate honors thesis program, I proposed a recreation program for the city of Longview. Longview is a city between Dallas and Shreveport, Louisiana, along I-25, or excuse me, I-20 in East Texas. And here's this northern kid living in a very southern environment. The city's idea of recreation was sports for boys, primarily football, cheerleading for girls. It was a racially segregated city. And my proposal was integrate and develop parks with recreation opportunities. Well, my thesis was accepted by the city of Longview. So in 1970, the summer that I graduated, they hired me to start a recreation program in that city. And that instituted program is now the foundation for the Department of Parks and Leisure Services for the entire city. So a great opportunity.
And I know for so many folks that when we're first starting our career, and there's so many different opportunities, and you're kind of finding your way. And I don't know, even in my 40s, I still think about what I may do, what my career path looks like. But among those experiences, can you share about when do you think that you knew that was the right career path? So I think about we get started in these little paths, and then you find out it's the right path or not. So how did you know that was? When was it that this is it? This parks and recreation, whether it's municipal parks or whatever, this is the right path for me.
All of this little seeds that had been planted, whether it was state parks in Minnesota, camping, bird watching with my mother, whatever the seeds were, they sprouted. And I would say they were confirmed during my years in a master's degree program at the University of Wyoming, that this was the right career opportunity. And eventually I went on to a PhD at the University of Minnesota, ultimately employed by Oklahoma State University, starting there in 1981. And it was all of those little events along the way and the people that you connect with that confirmed this was the right decision.
And I want to loop back. I think that's a go-kart race that shuts down the city. Sounds pretty darn cool. I think I'm gonna put that on my bucket list, right?
We only shut down the campus.
Or the campus. I'm sorry. Yeah. Still, I think that I'm thinking about like maybe that's a bucket list item that visit Longview. I think the next part, what I'd like if you could share with us, you talked a little bit about it with your master's degree in Wyoming and PhD in Minnesota, but could you talk about maybe trace back a little bit and then some of the key milestones in your career that you believe are in your career and how they progressed as well?
Focus really probably began with that proposed program for the city of Longview that was then implemented. It also led to a big milestone for me because I ended up hiring the woman that was going to become my wife and worked together with her in that program. But it confirmed the decision to pursue my PhD and ultimately the employment at Oklahoma State University. And then coming to Oklahoma State University gave the opportunity to develop some lifelong connections with the major recreation field, the National Park Service, the Army Corps of Engineers, the U.S. Forest Service, all of which ended up being crucial components. And then ultimately Oklahoma State Park. So I look back at those opportunities and building the connections.
So to share a little bit about my path. So I was an undergraduate student at Oklahoma State University, and I was a civil engineering major. And I had just completed my second year, and I'd done an internship, and it did not go well. During my other time, I was working for the Boys and Girls Clubs of America in Green Country there in Pryor and Choteau, Oklahoma. And when I thought about switching major, I was like, maybe nonprofit, work is where I'd like to be. I really enjoy this work with the kids and whatnot. And so I knew civil engineering wasn't in my future. I don't know, like you might appreciate this. I graduated with like 180 credits and an automatic math minor with a leisure service management degree. But I remember specifically when I was looking for my new degree program is something connected to nonprofit management. And I went to, at the time, it was the Colvin Center. And I met with a couple people, and you were included. And Dr. Gibson and I were talking about this a little bit as well. I remember like at the time, it was, I was very young and green and whatnot, but talking to you about what that next step was for me. And so this is kind of a moment of saying thank you, but also kind of highlighting you took the time, a kid that, dropped in, and you took about 30, 45 minutes of your time to explain what the degree program was and how we could, find my path and whatnot. And it was incredible. And it was a life-changing, that 30 minutes with you and Dr. Chris Cashel actually changed my life path. And so it's kind of leading us to the next question is, that was also the time I felt like, you took me under your wing, so to speak, and continued to throughout my career and still to this day, touch base with you. But you've been an incredible mentor, and I think other people will share this, is very thankful. But that's getting to me is like, who are your mentors? Who helped you along your path and what value? And could you just kind of walk us through some of that?
Well, again, I would start with my mother. She was, as I've said, an avid bird watcher, nature lover, only had an 8th grade education, but was an avid reader. And it was the opportunity to read Sam County Almanac or the writings of John Muir that really began to build an interest in me. But key people along the way. I had my boss at Minnesota State Parks, a gentleman named Dwayne Eilertson, who just recently passed away, was a major influence. Some of you in this part of the country might remember a guy named Ed Schimmel. Ed Schimmel was the director of Parks and Recreation for the city of Longview. He's the one that hired me and said, we have parks, We don't have the recreation that needs to be developed for the city. Can you start the program? Ultimately, John Schultz, who was a professor of mine at Wyoming, he moved to Minnesota, and he's the one that contacted me and said, help, I need you to come to Minnesota to get your doctorate and work on a project on the upper Mississippi River. And then a lot of you remember a lady here named Pauline Winter. Pauline was a wonderful mentor. Those people changed lives, and I benefited from it.
And so I think to add on to that is I think we owe them a debt of gratitude to prepare you to create the legacy you have. And so especially John Schultz asking you to come to Minnesota for a PhD, that definitely set a trajectory that you have affected so many other lives. Could you talk to kind of expand on that a little bit? Could you talk about how those mentorships influenced your philosophy related to maybe your mentorship or your professional philosophy in the field?
Probably the most significant part of each of those lives was their interest in the individual, the willingness to invest their time and effort. And I thought it would be wise to model that behavior, that my job was to plant seeds, nurture, and let the youth, the younger person, grow. And it's fun to see what's happened.
Thank you. To shift gears a little bit, I think especially, like I think about careers and mentorship, and the times we need that guidance oftentimes is when there's struggle, barriers, or obstacles. So I was going to ask you, what kind of challenges and obstacles did you face earlier in your career, and what were your processes by which to handle and overcome?
It's interesting. When I came to Oklahoma State University, 1981, there was research that was a part of the university, but it was not part of the program that I was involved with, the old school of hyper. We were a teaching unit. And being there from 1981 till the time I retired, I watched the university change from being purely a teaching institution to being a true research institution, fulfilling its state mandate. And then the other part was to watch the leisure studies program, which at one time was just a small component of an HPEL unit. We went from purely an undergraduate degree program into a program in a land-grant university that offered teaching, research, and service in a true scholarly setting, and ultimately had the undergraduate, master's, and doctoral program, and see a lot of the folk here that graduated from it, including yourself.
So to kind of add, so as you were talking about that, I was thinking about your time as from the teaching into the research aspect of it. So I guess my next question would be, what do you consider some of your legacy projects or your legacy highlights from your time at Oklahoma State and during that transition?
Certainly there are things at Oklahoma State University that I would consider to be a part of my legacy. Unfortunately, that's not as evident today as I would probably like it to have been. But the big ones that come to mind, Oklahoma, along with all the other states, were required to put together a statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan, commonly called a SCORP, in order to become eligible for federal funding. And through the 80s, I was appalled at the quality of the SCORP that was being produced, and started in 91, putting together the SCORP, and did the SCORP then from that time until 2018, that kept the state eligible for Land and Water Conservation Fund, for block grant monies. It ultimately benefits cities. It's fun to go around cities and see park signs that indicate LWCF monies were used for those parks, knowing that at least part of what I was doing was keeping that eligibility going for the cities and the counties. Probably a second major component was working with Oklahoma State Parks. They have the mandated state legislated resource management expectation for the state of Oklahoma, but they needed to professionalize, and we began doing resource management plans that have changed that unit. We did multiple visitor studies, multiple assessments of properties. The mandate to continue all of that remains in place, and unfortunately the state has chosen not to continue the planning process, but the record is still there. And probably the other thing that I look back on as a major part of my highlights of career, the National Council on Accreditation for Parks, Recreation, Tourism, and Allied Professions was a growing leader in quality of academic programs. And I had the privilege to serve 6 years as a member on that council, 2 years as chair, and took Oklahoma State University through accreditation a number of times.
And I had the pleasure of working on several of these projects as a student, undergraduate, and graduate. So my next question, please don't feel obligated to say it was with me, but of those projects across your career, do any of those stand out as specifically meaningful to you, or like again thinking about that legacy and those projects?
Well, certainly the people are just as important as the ultimate projects, but what really kind of stands out to me is we were able to develop a very positive reputation for Oklahoma State University in recreation, parks, and leisure studies. One of the accredited programs identified originally in the early 1990s as one of the top 5 programs in the nation. That was truly an honor. The professional development that was occurring in the Oklahoma State Park system at that time, hiring good people, training, developing, implementing professionalism. I was privileged to work with a lot of really good people. And another part of it was the work that we did with the SCORP and other research projects kept the state eligible for the Land and Water Conservation Fund monies, for our recreational trails monies, and I heard earlier community block grants. All of those were a part of the work that we did to keep the state eligible. So it's kind of fun to look around the state and you see a sign that there was some federal money put into these various locations, and you say, it was a part of what we did.
So recently, and I think I shared this with you last night, is I served as a consultant on the Vermont SCORP, and when I was in Burlington, Vermont, and somebody had mentioned Lowell Caneday in some manner, and like it took everything I had just not blurred out that like I know that guy, but it was also a special moment to know that I do have a connection to somebody that in a random meeting outside the Vermont SCORP and going through their process, that the value is definitely in Oklahoma with those LWCF monies, but the methodologies and the processes have a very wide impact as well. It's special to think about some of that.
It is.
So I kind of and I feel like, the legacy is continuing on, certainly. Something that you and I chatted about yesterday evening for a bit is I want to shift and think about the future challenges in the parks and recreation field. And I kind of know what you're going to say, but I need to ask for the sake of the audience, right? Is what do you believe are some of the bigger challenges facing parks and recreation as a field now and into some of the future?
There's several that come to mind. Probably number one on the list for me is lack of consistent funding. My focus has been on state parks. We have been willing to build buildings and then not maintain them. So I think we've had some adverse impacts on maintenance, adverse impacts on employment due to that lack of consistent funding, a willingness to build, but not recognize what's necessary to keep things going. I've watched the trends over time with employment of qualified personnel, salary and wage limitations that hindered the employment or the continued development of qualified personnel or retention of the qualified personnel in the various agencies. Those were some of the big challenges that I look at. Maintenance, there's a tendency, as I say, to develop the facilities without planning for that sustained maintenance. And as a result, I'll use state parks. We've had some serious problems with lodges. We've had serious problems with many facilities, restrooms, just because we don't maintain properly. But on a broader scale, I would say the real challenges that face our field: population growth, behavior changes, and the demands that those behaviors and growth put upon us and our resources.
So as you're kind of going through that, one of the things I was thinking about is I wonder, so you started your career at Oklahoma State in 1981. That wasn't too long after I was born. And I was thinking about, and that's thinking about thinking back about in the 80s and 90s, how have those challenges changed, or how do you feel that they're different or in a similar vein?
Clearly, society changes, people change, but to me, it's bigger questions that we are going to have to deal with. So I'll start with funding concerns. Are parks and recreation services perceived as being essential government services? Is that the role of a city, county, or state, or federal government to maintain a service, a facility that we would commonly call a park? Are citizens willing to pay taxes to sustain a park environment and all the recreation services? We have a tendency to highlight premier national parks, but we need the local parks just as well. Do government leaders see parks and recreation as being important public services? I'm not sure that in all cases that they really recognize the need for those services or as a governmental service. So a question that I have is, will parks and recreation remain as a governmental service, or will it be farmed out to the private world, which has a very different ethic in providing those services? Watching social change. It's a big hurdle for us to deal with in our field. Do voters and members of the public acknowledge parks and recreation as governmental services, or do they actually see them as private businesses? So it's an issue that we still have not resolved totally in the minds of the general public. Have behaviors and preferences changed to such an extent that our parks and recreation services and facilities no longer meet their expectations, that we are no longer truly serving our communities because of what people want to do. We were talking a little earlier. I look at my own neighbors, and they don't use our parks. They are involved with their phones, their electronic gadgets, but they are not spending time in the parks. And it's been a major change in the way people do things or fail to do things. And one other big one that comes to mind is safety. There was a time when, with even our kids, we would take them to the park or let them go to the park. For those in Stillwater, Babcock Park was right out our door. The kids could go to the park, and we didn't worry about them. Today, I wonder, are parks and trails safe enough and socially serving the needs of the people? Can you go to a park safely? Some big changes.
To kind of hone in a little bit differently, I guess, is that's very what I say municipal parks focused, and your career has a strong connection to the state park system. So looking more specifically at that angle, what do you see the role of the state parks being, and what hurdles are there to face in the next 5, 10, 20 years for the state park system?
Without getting too much in commentary on even the changes within the Oklahoma Tourism and Recreation Department, some of which are concerning. My concerns are the deterioration of historic properties from the Civilian Conservation Corps, the WPA, and other early development. We're losing the historic record of a lot of valuable properties in this state. There's been a reduction in the connection between park visitors and the natural setting. Unfortunately, I look at some of the things that are occurring in our state parks. People are willing to go to the park. They may often camp or stay in a lodge or whatever the particular activity, but they aren't using our trails. They are not aware of the natural environment. They would prefer an aerial tramway, a go-kart facility, or pick your event and facility. And unfortunately, it has totally changed what the parks once were.
So I'm going to make you happy. On my way here yesterday, I stopped in at Lake Thunderbird and specifically got out to go hike a trail for, I call it my mental health break, right? After you've been on the road a few hours. So I think shifting a little bit again is thinking about, when we think about legacy and mentorship kind of being the theme, is, we've got some younger faces out here. Is what advice would you give the young professionals just starting their career, parks, recreation, outdoor recreation?
Basically, I'd say the same thing I said to students years ago, and that is get experience. Connect with various agencies, whether it be public, private, nonprofit. Connect with an agency, get experience, volunteer, and pursue education. Those are the steps that will lead to a life of value and quality.
And the emphasis on education is especially home to me, I guess. I grew up in a single wide trailer in Northeast Texas before my parents divorced and we moved to Oklahoma. In education, I remember I was working at Taco Bell when I was a teenager, and I had a lady friend that I had a crush on, and we were talking about it. And I was like, I'm going to go to college. And she just is like, you're going to go to college? Really? Give me a break. But college, getting my undergraduate degree, and then that just set a path that completely changed my path, and that completely changed the opportunity that I had to have a different life than I would have. So I think it's crucially important. It's something that, I still kind of preach the same gospel, so to speak, to my students and my kiddos. So I guess that, and I want to have a few questions to kind of wrap up here is, so when you think about your overall journey, and you look back about your career, your education, all these projects and students and all that, is there anything you would have done differently?
At this point in my life, I do upon occasion say, what if I had done something differently? And I say, no. Things work out for good reasons. Why you connect with individuals, why you connect with jobs, why you marry certain people. It leads to life satisfaction. And I would not change a thing.
Thank you. Sincerely.
You're welcome.
And I think say thank you from a lot of folks out here. Your legacy and all of the folks here, your legacy with state parks in Oklahoma. Oklahoma was blessed to have you come here in 1981, and you've certainly made an impact that's incredible. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike. I would probably close with one comment that I think is kind of an intriguing statement. There's a gentleman, some of you know, named Ed Feit, who works now for the Grand River Dam Authority. But Ed Feit used to be the director of wild and scenic rivers for the state of Oklahoma. Worked a lot with Ed over the years. And his comment regularly is, leave the wood pile a little higher than you found it. And I think that's the way we should live our lives.
I remember you sharing that as a student many times as well, and I do appreciate it. Well, thank you for sharing this time with me. I would like to open it up if we could have a student or somebody with it's a student. So if anybody has any questions, we'd definitely like to share some time with you as well. Don't be afraid to raise your hand.
You were asked what you would say to younger people. What would you say to them in the game for 20, 30 years and were tired? What words of encouragement?
There's not a person here who chose the job you're in for the money. But when you have invested your time, your effort, your lives, the yield is worthwhile. So stay true to what you believe.
I know you talked some about sport, and we did on that for Oklahoma. When you're looking at such a large scope in undertaking, I know you said you were dissatisfied with the way sport was at one point. Where do you start when you are looking at making such potentially sweeping changes to bring something up to the scale you want it to be? That impacts such a large numbers of
question?
I think it starts with self-reflection. What am I responsible for? And secondly, it is building connections with key individuals. I could name numerous individuals. I'll just throw out a couple. A gentleman named Doug Hawthorne. You develop friendships, relationships that expand your own thinking, that build connections for opportunities to influence legislation, city decisions, whether it was Bill Nelson in Stillwater or pick the person. It's key to connect with people, take time to exchange ideas, to learn, and then work to build from those connections. It multiplies your influence.
What position did you play your baseball?
Well, I was a catcher. You look at my hands today and you realize it's not a good position to take. But I wouldn't undo it.
An incredible athlete of different sorts as well. To kind of brag at, when I first met Dr. Chris Cashel, she talked about what an incredible badminton player he was. And that's before I knew about the baseball career, and very avid in softball and volleyball and several other sports. Is quite the athlete.
When you say that people are more interested in aerial trampolines and go-kart tracks than doing the hiking trail, is that based on like survey or research or like anecdotal?
I would say it's anecdotal. We have done many, many user surveys over the years here in Oklahoma. And we get common, everyday responses routinely representing the interests of the public. And they want trails. They want play fields. They want recreation facilities, whether it's playgrounds or open space. Unfortunately, the decision makers over the years are the ones that say, oh no, we've got to put in something that's going to generate money. And they put in these high dollar facilities, whether it be a water slide or roller rink or go-kart track or whatever the case may be. And that's not necessarily what the public wants. There may be a small component, but it leads to some inconsistencies in the philosophy of what a particular agency or facility is about with what they are then providing. And that's what concerned me with what I was watching occur with Oklahoma State Parks. And unfortunately, it's in other settings as well.
What else?
I don't want to turn room.
Getting his steps in.
I guess a bit of a follow-up to that question and your answer. With agencies starting to focus more on revenue generation. In your opinion, what are some good ways to advocate for these more passive uses of spaces, or that may not generate revenue, but the public is, at least statistically, in the ones that do respond to surveys, seem to be wanting and asking for it?
I don't know that it's a short-term fix. I think it's a long-term change in society. I'm going to again use state parks as an example. Believe it or not, there's a relatively small percentage of the population of the state of Oklahoma that ever visits a state park. And I'm talking in the range of 12 to 15%, which tells you that maybe 85% of the people in the state don't visit a state park in a year. Yet all of us are paying taxes to the agency. I don't know that I have the right answers for the next generation. One of the things that I think happens with aging is that you disconnect from the various younger population groups. It's key for folks in the profession right now to keep the doors open, listen to the public. What do they want? What are they willing to pay for? What should be considered a base, essential government service as contrasted with a private commercial product? You guys have the challenge. Every day it's in front of you. But you're the ones that make the difference. And I apologize that I don't have a good answer.
So I kind of feel weird using a microphone. What is your view on the loss of our only national park is
Chickasaw National Recreation Area.
Is it a thing of importance or just a change of title and other reasons?
Clearly, the National Park Service went through a number of iterations of change in how they classified properties. What originally was Platte National Park, now Chickasaw National Recreation Area, is one of those original politically designated parks back in the early 1900s. When the National Park Service reclassified its various properties, where you have actually wilderness, national parks, national recreation areas, national historic sites, there's a question of how do you fit these together. The property hasn't changed. The value of that setting hasn't changed. The name may be different, but it still provides the recreation experience that people would want. And if you've not been to Chickasaw National Recreation Area, go hike, go wade, soak in the travertine spring. It meets the requirement of a park. It's a great interpretive site. Yes. Yes.
Well, I can appeal the last question. So, first of all, you have to understand this is thought for my reporters as a whole. I say that absolutely love my home. I'm very fortunate that I have a group of students that are here I know you've asked this question, or sorry, you've answered this question in multiple different ways. I'm going to ask you to be brief and give them a little nugget of knowledge. What would you tell our new professionals, and I would say that it's 5 years or less, all the way through the school system? What do they need to do to be successful?
I think success starts with internal grounding. Know what you believe. I believe that each of us has some moral, ethical values that are going to be shown in our lives if we are true to ourselves. Your values, your morality can be influenced by those who have gone before. Personally, I find a good bit of the value and foundation for me has come out of the literature. Those who built a reputation, a John Muir, an Aldo Leopold, a Pauline Winter, listen to the people that have been mentors to you. Integrate that into your lives. Recognize that the real value of life is not US dollars. It's the record that you can build and the investment that you can make in other people. And that's why it's fun to see what has happened here.
So I think to wrap it up is you mentioned leaving the woodpile a little bit higher than where you found it. And I think that I speak for a lot of us that because of your philosophy, sharing that is, I think, your legacy carries on and how we want to leave the woodpile higher than we found it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been an honor.